Till death do us part is usually a vow, not a timeline. But for the 6 couples in this dossier, a romantic getaway turned into a forensic puzzle in seconds. From a honeymoon in the Alps to a quiet tent in Banff, we analyze the exact moment when human devotion was crushed by the indifference of nature and machinery. This is a strict analysis of survival errors and fatal physics. Do not attempt to recreate these scenarios. Watch closely. Sometimes the person you love is the reason you don't survive. September 29th, 2023. The Red Deer River Valley, located deep within the remote, spine-crushing interior of Banff National Park, Alberta. The silence here is not peaceful. It is heavy, a suffocating quiet that predates human history and indifferent to human survival. This is not the tourist-friendly facade of the Canadian Rockies, where families take photos by the roadside. This is the backcountry, a place where the rules of civilization evaporate, replaced entirely by the binary logic of the food chain. As the sun dipped below the jagged snow-dusted peaks, the temperature plummeted, and a cold, sleeting rain began to fall, turning the ground into a freezing slurry of mud and ice. In this vast, darkening wilderness, a single nylon dome stood as a tiny, fragile island of human order. Inside were Doug Inglis and Jenny Gussie, both 62 years old. They were not naive tourists taking a risk for a social media photo. They were veterans of the wild, highly experienced hikers who treated nature with the reverence and caution of field scientists. They did everything right. Their campsite was a masterclass in survival protocol. Their food was suspended high in the trees, well away from the sleeping area, neutralizing any olfactory temptation that might draw a predator. Their cooking gear was scrubbed clean and stored separately. Inside the tent, they were settling in for the night, reading by the soft, artificial glow of their e-readers, with their border collie, Tris, curled faithfully at their feet. They had created a perfect perimeter of safety, a textbook setup designed to mitigate every calculated risk. But the fallacy of the human mind is the belief that protocols can negotiate with biology. In the darkness outside, a shadow detached itself from the tree line. It was a female grizzly bear, 25 years old, an ancient creature by the standards of her species. Her teeth were worn down to the nerve, making hunting natural prey difficult. Her body was carrying less fat than necessary for the coming winter hibernation. She was not curious. She was desperate. The attack did not begin with a roar or a warning display. It began with the sudden, violent collapse of the tent structure as over 300 pounds of muscle drove through the nylon wall. At 8 p.m., the Garmin InReach satellite device registered a frantic SOS message sent from Doug's account. It contained 3 words: "Bear attack bad." This timestamp marks the bifurcation point between their orderly life and chaotic oblivion. What followed was not a quick execution, but a prolonged kinetic struggle in the pitch black. The forensic reconstruction of the scene revealed a harrowing truth that dismantles the comforting myth of playing dead. Doug and Jenny did not submit. They fought. 2 canisters of bear spray were found at the scene. Both had been fully discharged. This is the tragic irony of the event. The safety equipment functioned perfectly. They saturated the air with capsaicin, a chemical irritant designed to overwhelm a predator's sensory organs. Under normal circumstances, this creates an impenetrable barrier of pain. But the creature invading their sanctuary was not a normal animal. It was a biological machine driven by starvation and predatory aggression. The bear fought through the chemical cloud, indifferent to the pain, driven by a primal imperative that overrode its self-preservation instincts. The sheer kinetic energy of the animal rendered the spray useless. The couple, disoriented and blinded by the shredded tent and the dark, faced a force against which human biology has no defense. The attack transitioned from a territorial dispute to a predatory event. The injuries sustained were consistent with high-velocity, blunt force trauma and massive structural compromise. The clinical reality is that the human body, evolved for tool use and endurance, collapses instantly under the mechanical stress applied by a grizzly's jaw and claws. The specialized forensic analysis indicated that the dog, Tris, attempted to intervene and was also neutralized. The fight was intense, chaotic, and ultimately determined by mass and ferocity. The weather compounded the tragedy. The SOS signal reached the Parks Canada dispatch, but the low cloud ceiling and freezing rain grounded the rescue helicopter. The technology that promised connection to the civilized world was rendered impotent by the atmospheric conditions. A specialized wildlife human attack response team had to travel by ground, navigating the treacherous terrain in the dark. It took them hours to reach the coordinates. When they finally arrived at 1 a.m., the valley was silent again. The beam of their flashlights cut through the rain and revealed the aftermath of the collision between human preparation and natural law. The tent was flattened, a ruin of fabric and poles pressed into the mud. The 2 empty canisters of bear spray lay nearby, artifacts of a failed defense. Doug and Jenny were found near each other, their bodies testifying to a final stand rather than a passive death. They had not been dragged away. The engagement had ended where it began. The narrative of safety was dismantled. While the team was securing the site, the bear returned. Emerging from the darkness, it displayed the same aggressive, predatory fixation charging the armed specialist. It was immediately neutralized by gunfire. A necropsy later confirmed the bear's poor physical condition, explaining its deviation from typical avoidance behavior. This tragedy serves as a cold, undeniable testament to the limits of human control. Doug and Jenny were competent, prepared, and armed with the best deterrents available. They died not because they made a mistake, but because they occupied a space where the laws of probability intersected with a desperate biological entity. The wilderness does not bargain with protocols. December 25, 2013. The Chassahowitzka Wildlife Management Area, Florida. On the surface, the world was celebrating a holiday, wrapped in the warmth of a mild winter afternoon. But beneath a deceptively calm, tea-colored pond hidden in the scrub, a different reality existed, a world of perpetual night, crushing pressure, and geological indifference. This is the Eagle's Nest sinkhole, a site revered and feared in the diving community as the Mount Everest of underwater caves. It is a vertical abyss that drops hundreds of feet into the earth before opening into a cathedral-like cavern system known as the Grand Canyon of Florida. Entering this water were Patrick Peacock and Christina Malloy. They were not novices. They were enthusiasts drawn to the silent majesty of the subterranean world. Patrick was a highly skilled instructor, a man who lived by the rigid laws of dive tables and gas mixtures. Christina was an experienced diver, though less seasoned in the extreme technical demands of this specific depth. Their plan was a celebration of their shared passion, a descent into the Room of Dreams, a vast chamber located nearly 300 feet down. They checked their regulators, verified their gas reserves, and submerged. As they passed through the chimney, a narrow limestone throat leading to the depths, they crossed the threshold from the biological world to the geological one. At the surface, air is easy. At depth, it becomes a finite, rapidly consuming resource. As they descended past 200 feet, the physics of the environment began to alter their internal biology. The nitrogen in the air they breathed, harmless at the surface, was now being forced into their bloodstreams at high pressure, acting as a potent anesthetic. This is nitrogen narcosis, often called the Martini effect. It dulls the senses, slows reaction times, and can induce a euphoric sense of invincibility or sudden, paralyzing terror. The dive proceeded according to plan until the deepest phase of the profile. At a depth exceeding 250 feet, the margin for error is non-existent. The pressure here is 9 times greater than at the surface. It was in this hostile zone that the variable of human physiology betrayed them. Christina began to struggle. Whether it was a minor equipment issue, a buoyancy fluctuation, or simply the overwhelming crushing weight of the water, the precise catalyst remained silent. However, the physiological reaction was textbook: panic. Under the influence of severe nitrogen narcosis, panic does not look like a movie scene. It is a confused, disjointed breakdown of cognitive function. A diver in this state forgets training, forgets the way out, and most critically, begins to hyperventilate. In the deep, heavy air, rapid breathing is a death sentence. It causes carbon dioxide, CO2, to build up in the lungs, which in turn amplifies the narcosis and the feeling of suffocation, creating a terrifying feedback loop known as the panic cycle. Patrick saw his partner's distress. This was the moment of bifurcation. A cold, logical calculation would have dictated self-preservation. Ascend immediately to a safe depth to clear his own head and survive. But the human bond overrode the survival instinct. Patrick swam to her. He initiated contact, attempting to calm her, to stabilize her buoyancy, and to reorient her in the absolute blackness. The forensic narrative of the next few minutes is a tragedy of physics. As Christina's breathing rate spiked, she depleted her gas supply at an exponential rate. When a tank runs dry at 300 feet, there is no slow fade. The air simply stops. Patrick, adhering to the deepest code of the buddy system, offered his own regulator. They began air sharing, breathing from a single tank while suspended in the void. But at this depth, the air is thick and dense, moving like syrup through the hoses. Two stressed adults hyperventilating on one regulator at extreme depth creates a demand that the mechanical system struggles to meet. They were burning through their remaining time in seconds, not minutes. The narcosis likely clouded their judgment, preventing them from realizing that their only hope was an immediate, aggressive ascent. Instead, they remained deep, locked in a futile attempt to solve a problem that required oxygen they no longer had. The pressure gauge on Patrick's tank ticked down to zero. The silence of the cave reclaimed them. There was no struggle against a predator, only the quiet cessation of physics. Their regulators fell from their mouths, and the darkness took over. Days later, a specialized recovery team descended into the abyss. The scene they found was a somber tableau of loyalty. Patrick and Christina were not separated by panic or abandonment. They were found close together, their gear entangled, floating in the silent water of the main cavern. Patrick had not left her side. The forensic analysis confirmed the cause of death as drowning secondary to air depletion. The tragedy of Eagle's Nest is not just about the danger of depth. It is about the lethal intersection of biology and emotion. The nitrogen compromised their minds. The depth compromised their air supply, and their loyalty to one another sealed the outcome. In the unforgiving math of cave diving, the decision to stay and help, while morally heroic, was physically fatal. They died because they refused to break the connection between them, even as the environment demanded a sacrifice. The cave remains a beautiful, indifferent void, holding the memory of a Christmas day where love was not enough to overcome the laws of gas density and pressure. June 7, 2010, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Beneath the asphalt grid of the bustling city lies a shadow metropolis, a sprawling silent network of concrete arteries designed to be invisible to the population above. These are the drainage tunnels of the Kinnickinnic River system, massive subterranean culverts engineered for a singular brutal purpose: to evacuate floodwater from the urban surface as rapidly as possible. On this humid summer evening, the tunnels were dry, cool, and deceptively peaceful. To the untrained eye, they appeared to be static monuments of civil engineering, vast, echoing chambers of gray concrete that stretched for miles into the darkness, possessing a stark, industrial beauty. Into this industrial underworld descended Casey O'Neill, 29, and Kristen Klepak, 23. They were not vandals, criminals, or homeless. They were urban explorers, enthusiasts drawn to the hidden geometry of the city. They sought the sublime in the infrastructure, the thrill of standing in a space built by humans but forbidden to them. They parked their car, donned waders, and entered the mouth of a tunnel, moving deeper into the hollow belly of Milwaukee. They were equipped with flashlights and a sense of adventure, but they lacked the one piece of data that determined their survival: the meteorological forecast. Above ground, the atmosphere was destabilizing. A severe thunderstorm cell was forming, loaded with millions of tons of water ready to drop. The couple was walking into a machine that was about to be switched on. The tragedy of the Milwaukee tunnels is strictly a matter of fluid dynamics. In a natural riverbed, rocks, soil, and vegetation create friction, slowing the water down and allowing energy to dissipate. In a concrete drainage tunnel, friction is chemically eliminated. The surfaces are smooth, hard, and impermeable. When water enters this system, it does not flow. It accelerates. It becomes a frictionless projectile. As Casey and Kristen moved further in, exploring the graffiti-lined walls and taking photos, the sky above opened up. The rain did not start as a drizzle. It was a deluge, a sudden violent release of atmospheric pressure. The city streets funneled this liquid mass into the storm drains, which fed directly into the tunnel where the couple stood. The transformation of the environment was absolute. 1 minute they were walking on damp concrete in a silent cathedral. The next, the tunnel became the barrel of a hydraulic cannon. The first warning was likely acoustic, a low vibrating hum that quickly escalated into a deafening roar, sounding like an approaching freight train. This was the sound of air being compressed and pushed ahead of the rushing water. The physics of a flash flood in a confined space are terrifying. The water does not rise gradually like a filling bathtub. It arrives as a bore, a vertical wall of turbulent liquid moving at speeds that can exceed 30 miles per hour. When this wall hit Casey and Kristen, the interaction was not survivable. The kinetic energy of water moving at that velocity strikes the human body with the force of a car crash. They were not swept away in a romantic sense. They were instantly knocked off their feet and subjected to extreme blunt force trauma as they were slammed against the concrete walls and ceiling. The depth of the water rose from inches to over 6 feet in a matter of minutes. In this chaotic, churning washing machine of debris and sewage, buoyancy is impossible. A critical and often overlooked factor in these deaths is aeration. The turbulence mixes massive amounts of air bubbles into the current, significantly reducing the density of the water. In aerated water, the physics of flotation fail. Even a strong swimmer sinks like a stone. The couple was trapped in a dark, high-velocity slipstream tumbling blindly through the pitch-black artery of the city. Their flashlights would have been extinguished instantly. They were alone in the absolute dark, battered by the very infrastructure that was protecting the citizens above. The system worked exactly as designed. It efficiently captured the runoff, accelerated it, and ejected it toward Lake Michigan to prevent property damage on the surface. The tunnels are indifferent to biological life. They handle volume and velocity. Casey and Kristen were simply foreign objects in the flow. The storm passed as quickly as it had arrived. The water receded, leaving the tunnels dripping and silent once more. When the couple failed to return, a search was launched. The reality of the urban exploration turned into a recovery mission. Their bodies were eventually located miles downstream, carried out into the harbor and the open lake. The medical examiner's report cited drowning, but the physical reality was a combination of asphyxia and multiple traumatic injuries. They had been processed by the city's immune system. This tragedy stands as a grim monument to the disconnect between the human perception of stability and the dynamic reality of infrastructure. The concrete tunnel looked like a shelter, solid and immovable, but in reality, it was a dormant weapon, waiting for the rain. Casey and Kristen died not because the tunnel failed, but because it functioned with lethal perfection. They were intruders in a machine that had no off switch, casualties of a system that prioritizes the safety of the city over the lives of those who venture inside its veins. May 23, 2021. The Stresa-Mottarone cable car line, Piedmont, Italy. To the observer, the setting was a postcard of European perfection. The sapphire waters of Lake Maggiore below, the emerald slopes of the Alps rising above, and a clear, azure sky marking the first real weekend of freedom after months of suffocating COVID-19 lockdowns. For Silvia Malnati, 26, and Alessandro Merlo, 29, this Sunday was supposed to be a celebration of that returned liberty. They were a young couple, deeply in love, seeking nothing more than the panoramic view from the summit of Monte Motorone. They boarded cabin number 3, a glass and metal gondola designed to offer a frictionless ascent into the clouds. The cabin was a masterpiece of Swiss engineering, a suspended vessel held aloft by massive steel cables and guided by the immutable laws of tension and counterweight. In the mind of the passenger, such a system is binary. It works or it stops. There is an implicit trust that the redundant safety systems, layers of mechanical failsafes, are standing guard against gravity. But unknown to Silvia, Alessandro, and the 13 others on board, that trust had been silently betrayed days before they even bought their tickets. The hidden factor in this tragedy was not a mechanical defect, but a human decision born of impatience and greed. The cable car system had been experiencing technical glitches. The emergency brakes were triggering falsely, halting the lift and causing service delays. To fix this, the operators inserted forks, red claw-shaped steel spacers, into the brake calipers. These devices are designed solely for maintenance, to physically prevent the brakes from clamping down. By leaving them in during operation, the staff effectively lobotomized the system's survival instinct. They gambled that the main tow cable would never break. On this Sunday, that gamble expired. At 12:22 p.m., cabin number 3 was approaching the summit station. They were less than 5 meters from the docking platform. The passengers could see the station operator. They were seconds away from stepping onto solid ground. It was at this precise moment of maximum tension that the main traction cable, a woven steel rope as thick as a wrist, snapped. The sound would have been like a cannon shot, a whip crack of releasing tension that echoed across the valley. In a normal scenario, this is terrifying, but survivable. The loss of tension should have instantly triggered the emergency brakes, powerful hydraulic jaws designed to bite into the stationary carrying cable and freeze the cabin in place. The physics of the safety system attempted to execute this command. The hydraulic pressure released, the jaws slammed shut, but they hit the red steel forks. The brakes could not engage. The safety mechanism was physically blocked by the spacers. Gravity, now unopposed, took immediate possession of the cabin. What followed was a nightmare of reverse acceleration. Instead of docking, the cabin began to slide backward down the steep incline. This was not a slow drift, it was a free fall on rails. The cabin accelerated to over 60 miles per hour in seconds, hurtling back toward the valley floor. Inside, the sensation was a violent reversal of reality. The view of safety receding rapidly, replaced by the blur of passing trees and the sickening drop of the stomach associated with negative G-force. Silvia and Alessandro were trapped in a glass box transforming into a missile. The cabin raced down the support cable, bypassing the intermediate pylon, picking up lethal kinetic energy. Upon reaching the first support pylon, the geometry of the system failed. The cabin, moving far beyond its design speed, struck the pylon with catastrophic force. The impact acted as a ramp, launching the gondola off the cable entirely. The vessel was airborne. It plummeted 60 feet through the air, crashing into the steep wooded slope below, but the violence did not end with the impact. The momentum carried the shattered cabin rolling down the mountain, tumbling through the forest until it was finally stopped by the trunk of a massive pine tree. The sequence of events, from the snap of the cable to the final rest, lasted less than 30 seconds. The forces subjected to the human bodies inside were extreme: rapid deceleration, blunt force trauma, and massive structural compression. The clinical reality is that the human frame cannot withstand the energy of a 60-mile-per-hour impact followed by a tumbling crush. Sylvia and Alessandro died together, victims of a fatal deceleration. When first responders arrived, the silence of the forest was heavy. Among the wreckage, investigators found the smoking gun, the red steel forks still inserted in the brake calipers of the mangled wreckage. They were not damaged. They had done their job perfectly, preventing the brakes from saving the lives on board. This tragedy is a brutal lesson in the mechanics of negligence. The cable car did not fail because of a mysterious act of God. It failed because the safety system was viewed as an inconvenience rather than a necessity. Sylvia and Alessandro were not killed by the fall. They were killed by the decision to prioritize the schedule over the failsafe. They were passengers on a machine that had been stripped of its ability to protect them, turning a scenic journey into a mathematical certainty of death the moment the cable gave way. Matt and Sunday Rowan, the Lockhart balloon crash, 2016. July 30th, 2016, Lockhart, Texas. The promise of a hot air balloon ride is built on a specific romantic aesthetic: silence, weightlessness, and a detachment from the troubles of the earth. It is an experience marketed as the ultimate expression of freedom, a slow drift across the morning sky where the laws of the world below seem to no longer apply. For Matt and Sunday Rowan, both 34 years old and recently married, this flight was a celebration, a gift to mark a new chapter in their lives together. They arrived at the launch site in the pre-dawn darkness, joining 14 other passengers in the large wicker basket of the Heart of Texas balloon. The atmosphere was one of hushed anticipation and nervous excitement. They watched the massive envelope of the balloon fill with hot air, transforming from a limp fabric into a towering, colorful giant. At this moment, the human world was defined by absolute trust. They trusted the physics of buoyancy. They trusted the integrity of the equipment. And most critically, they trusted the pilot, Alfred "Skip" Nichols. To the passengers, Nichols appeared to be a seasoned aviator, the master of the vessel. They could not see the hidden chemical variable circulating in his bloodstream. The forensic toxicology report would later reveal that Nichols was operating the aircraft under the influence of a potent cocktail of Valium, oxycodone, and cyclobenzaprine, a chemical haze that severely compromised his cognitive function and reaction time. As the balloon lifted off the ground at 7:09 a.m., the passengers were not flying with a pilot. They were trapped in a basket with a man whose perception of reality was chemically altered. The flight began beautifully, drifting over the patchwork fields of central Texas. But the environmental context was deteriorating. A thick layer of fog and low-hanging clouds was moving in, a meteorological curtain that demanded precise navigation and situational awareness. A sober pilot would have recognized the danger of the ceiling, the cloud layer that obscures the ground. Nichols, however, made the fatal decision to ascend above the clouds to give his passengers a view of the sunrise. For a few minutes, the experience was euphoric, a golden moment floating above a white ocean. But to land, they had to come down. As the balloon began its descent, they entered the White Room. Visual references vanished. The basket was now dropping through a dense gray mist, effectively blinding the pilot to what lay beneath. In aviation, this is known as spatial disorientation. Without visual cues, the human brain cannot accurately judge speed or distance. The balloon was heavy, carrying 16 people and massive propane tanks, descending with significant momentum. The silence of the clouds was broken only by the intermittent deafening roar of the burners. At 7:42 a.m., the basket broke through the bottom of the cloud layer. The ground rushed up to meet them, but it was not an open field. Directly in their path stood a row of high-voltage transmission towers. This was the moment of convergence. The passengers likely had a split second to process the geometry of the steel towers looming out of the fog before the physics of the crash initiated. The pilot attempted a desperate burn, firing the heaters to gain altitude. But the laws of inertia are absolute. A balloon of that mass cannot reverse its vertical velocity instantly. The basket struck the 345,000-volt power lines. The interaction between the human vessel and the electrical grid was catastrophic. The contact did not just cause a collision, it created a massive electrical arc, a bridge of raw energy hotter than the surface of the sun. The high-voltage current surged through the metal components of the basket and the fuel system, instantly igniting the propane tanks. The sound of the impact was followed immediately by the roar of an uncontrolled inferno. But the horror of the Lockhart crash is not just the fire, it is the separation. The intense heat of the electrical arc and the subsequent fire melted the cables connecting the wicker basket to the balloon envelope. In a horrific instant, the concept of flight was negated. The balloon, light and filled with hot air, shot upward, liberated from its load. The basket, containing Matt, Sunday the pilot, and 13 others succumbed to gravity. It fell nearly 100 feet, a burning cage dropping like a stone. The terror of this final phase is difficult to articulate. The passengers were trapped in a confined space that was simultaneously falling and burning. There was no exit, no parachute, no possibility of rescue. The basket impacted the pasture below with terminal velocity. The medical examiner's report is a clinical document of total devastation citing blunt force trauma and thermal injuries as the causes of death for all 16 souls. It was the deadliest ballooning disaster in American history. When investigators arrived, the field was scorched, marked by the charred remains of the basket and the twisted metal of the frame. The balloon envelope was found miles away, a drifting tombstone that had continued to fly long after its passengers were gone. Matt and Sunday Rowan died because they placed their faith in a system that had no safeguards against human negligence. The couple's final moments were a collision between the romance of flight and the unforgiving reality of high-voltage electricity. A disaster born from the mind of an impaired pilot who steered them out of the light and into the wires. January 4th, 2020, Tel Aviv, Israel. In the architecture of a modern metropolis, safety is assumed to be a passive, built-in feature of daily life. We live in climate-controlled environments protected by reinforced concrete and steel, operating under the silent belief that the chaos of the natural world has been zoned out by city planning. Dean Shoshani and Stav Harari, both 25 years old, lived within this comfortable illusion of urban security. They were a young couple starting their lives together in a basement apartment on Nadav Street in the Hatikva neighborhood. On this Saturday, a massive winter storm system stalled over the coast, unleashing a torrential downpour that quickly overwhelmed the city's drainage infrastructure. The streets turned into raging rivers, but inside their residential building, the threat seemed abstract, a logistical problem for pedestrians and drivers, not a mortal danger for people inside their own home. Noticing the rising water level on the street, they made a routine, pragmatic decision to take the elevator down to the underground parking garage, level 1, to move their car to higher ground and prevent flood damage. They stepped into the elevator, a standard residential lift, a steel box designed for vertical transport, equipped with safety sensors and emergency brakes. They pressed the button for the basement. The doors slid shut, sealing them inside a soundproof windowless capsule. At that moment, they were not in danger. They were simply passengers in a mundane piece of machinery. However, while they were descending, the situation in the garage had catastrophically shifted. The drainage pumps had failed, or been overwhelmed by the sheer volume of the deluge. Millions of gallons of runoff water, carrying mud, sewage, and debris, were surging into the parking level, transforming it into a subterranean reservoir. The elevator was not descending into a garage. It was descending into a tank. The tragedy of Dean and Stav is a nightmare of automation gone wrong. The elevator shaft acted as a sump, collecting the rising water. As the cabin reached the bottom level, the sensors likely detected the water, or a short circuit occurred, triggering the safety mechanism. The elevator stopped. The doors remained locked. The electrical system died. They were now trapped in a dark steel cage, suspended in a rapidly filling concrete pool. The physics of this trap are merciless and counterintuitive to the panic of the victims. The water did not stay outside. It began to force its way in through the floor vents and the seams of the doors. At first, it was just a leak, wet shoes, confusion, but the pressure outside was rising exponentially. This is the phenomenon of hydrostatic lock. With the water level outside higher than inside, the pressure exerted against the sliding doors was immense, equivalent to tons of force. No amount of human strength could pry them open from the inside. The couple called emergency services, their voices captured in recordings that document the harrowing transition from concern to absolute terror. They reported the water rising to their waists, then their chests. The temperature of the water was freezing, inducing immediate hypothermic shock, which drains physical strength and clouds cognitive function within minutes. The elevator became a sealed aquarium. Outside, the neighborhood was in chaos. Residents heard the banging from the elevator shaft. They knew someone was inside. Neighbors attempted to pry the doors open with crowbars, desperate to help, but the steel doors, held shut by the water pressure and the mechanical lock, would not budge. The tragedy here is the proximity of rescue. Help was separated from them by only a few inches of steel, yet they were in a different world entirely. The rescue services were paralyzed by the scale of the citywide flooding. The streets were impassable, and standard fire trucks were useless against a submerged basement. Specialized scuba divers, an absurdity in a residential building context, were required. By the time the specialized La Hava Fire and Rescue Unit arrived, navigated the flooded streets, and dove into the murky, freezing water of the parking garage, nearly an hour had passed. The divers had to use hydraulic spreaders to force the elevator doors open underwater. Inside, the air pocket had vanished long ago. Dean and Stav were found floating in the water that had filled the cabin to the ceiling. They were still wearing their winter coats, heavy with water, which would have made staying afloat impossible even if there had been air. The clinical cause of death was drowning, but the true architect of their demise was the failure of urban infrastructure to cope with a natural anomaly. They died because a safety protocol, the locking of elevator doors during a fault, functioned correctly in the wrong environment. The elevator, designed to protect passengers from falling, became a vault that prevented them from escaping the rising tide. It serves as a terrifying reminder that in a modern city, we are often just one mechanical failure away from a primal struggle for survival.